Ever since the cavemen Urg and Murk got into a loving relationship, queer people have been a thing. And whether it's building empires, creating art, fighting against fascism, or fighting for it, nobody can deny queer people played a huge part in history. Now there are a lot of people saying stuff like, why is history suddenly so woke? We didn't have all that bullshit 50 years ago. Besides statements like these being a great argument against free speech, they are also wrong. The real reason history has suddenly quote-unquote gone woke isn't because liberal Marxist elite lizard people want to retcon our entire history. Rather, it's the destigmatization of queer people. Because for the longest time in Western civilization, people just kinda put their hands over their ears, buried their heads in the sand going, la la la, I can't hear you. And this pretending of queer people not existing occurred not only during the time it happened, but also in the years later by historians. In older history books, you'll often find euphemisms such as good friends or roommates. And that's exactly what this video is about. Some of history's most famous roommates. Now if I know anything about lesbians, I don't, they are eusocial creatures, not too dissimilar to bees or ants. And just like bees and ants have a queen, the lesbians do too. Not this queen bee, this one. Sappho of Lesbos. And while she probably didn't invent the concept of being a lesbian, she was most certainly the first to put it to paper, with poems describing love and eros between women, leading to her name becoming synonymous with homosexual women. And this is all well and good, but for most of history, historians saw her as straight. The woman whose most famous surviving work consisted of thirsting over Aphrodite for multiple pages. This might look like a bad thing, but it's actually really good, because if this is straight, then kissing the homies goodnight, well that's straight too. The only thing I can say about this next guy is Slay Queen, and by slay I mean slaying Polish people. Yes, we're talking about the man that is the Enlightenment made manifest, the flamboyantly brilliant king of Prussia, Frederick the Great. For most of history, kings or queens being gay was an extremely well-kept secret. A lot of queer royals, despite feeling no attraction to the opposite sex whatsoever, often married anyway, either by being married off as a child or as a way to stay safe. But still, if you study them very closely, you could sometimes find hints here and there that could allude to their real sexuality. Yeah, not with Frederick the Great. He made it really fucking obvious. I'm just gonna list all the facts here, ranging from least to most obvious. Starting off, Frederick never produced an heir. Now this isn't really that weird. Lots of people didn't have children, and with European royals being as inbred as can be, the chance that he or his wife were impotent wasn't all that small. Saying that, he fucking hated his wife, reportedly never having spent the night with her and divorcing her as soon as his father kicked the bucket. Frederick also had many quote-unquote intimate friendships over the course of his life. One of these intimate friends was the bisexual Venetian philosopher Francesco Algarotti, who wrote a poem for him that's way too explicit to read on YouTube. Frederick had also tried to seduce the renowned French philosopher Voltaire, but quickly gave up on that. Not because Voltaire wasn't interested or something, no. Voltaire was just such an insufferable French know-it-all that Frederick just couldn't handle him. There are several more anecdotes that prove Frederick's homosexuality, but that's not what I want to talk about here. What I want to talk about is one of my favorite historical anecdotes. Say viewer, do you like potatoes? Yeah, I guess they're okay. Oh, of course I love potatoes. Well, dear viewer, you very indirectly have Frederick the Great to thank for that. Yep, I tricked you. You thought this was a video on LGBT history? Well, not anymore it isn't. We're going to talk about potatoes. Frederick realized that potatoes were an amazing crop, high in calories, easy to cultivate. The only problem was, nobody ate them. People were scared of them, which isn't that weird since literally every part of the plant that isn't the potato itself is really fucking poisonous. Frederick wanted to popularize the potato by leading by example. He gathered a large group of people, sat down in front of them, and like Samwise Gamgee demonstrated what you could do with them.
What's taters, precious? What's taters, huh?
Potatoes. Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew.
But even eating potatoes in front of a large crowd of people wasn't enough to convince the populace of the benefits of taters. No, Frederick had to be smart about this. What he did was probably the greatest bit of reverse psychology in the history of mankind. He banned potatoes, declaring them to be a royal crop, which meant that only the royal family was allowed to eat them and that only the royal farms were allowed to grow them. He even placed soldiers around the fields to guard them against possible thieves. And it worked. Suddenly everybody and their grandmother wanted a piece of this most exclusive of foods. And Frederick made that possible. He had instructed the soldiers that stood guard around the farms to do their jobs as poorly as they possibly could, while still convincingly acting like they were guarding the place. And every night thieves would sneak onto the fields and take some potatoes with them and sell them all over Prussia, which resulted in a massive boom to the potatoes' popularity. And you can still see the effects of this trick today, with potatoes being a staple of German cuisine. Moving on, this is the French diplomat and spy Charles d'Eon de Beaumont. Or is it Charlotte d'Eon de Beaumont? What was going on was that d'Eon would have male jobs for their entire life, but in private they would dress and act female. Yep, d'Eon is one of the first recorded transgender people in history. But that isn't what makes them interesting. What makes them interesting is that they were also the first to fucking weaponize it. d'Eon was a member of the Secret du Roi, or King's Secret, a group of spies that answered only to the King of France. During that time, the 7 Years' War was ravaging Europe and France was in a bit of a pickle. That's why they desperately wanted to form an alliance with Russia. There was, however, a small problem. To get to the Russian Empress, you first had to cross lands held by the British, who were ordered to shoot any man on sight. This is where d'Eon's weaponized transgenderism came in handy. Back then, women's rights were more of a punchline than an actual cause. Luckily, d'Eon was technically a man. Meanwhile, the British wouldn't shoot them because they were technically also a woman. Yep, this motherfucker just combined everything useful about being a man with everything useful about being a woman. Not much else is known about their little trip to Russia, only that they worked in the French embassy for a couple of years. Upon returning to France, they were immediately sent to London to draft a peace treaty for the 7 Years' War, the details of which aren't that interesting. But this did earn them their knighthood, making them officially Chevalier d'Eon. d'Eon's androgynous appearance did spark a debate among some of London's wealthy elite, so they made a wager on the London Stock Exchange, where people could place bets on what d'Eon's biological sex was. And d'Eon was even invited to undress in front of a large crowd of people, which they refused. I can only imagine how that would have gone down. Okay, so what are you exactly? I'm a knight. No, I mean your sex. Are you referring to the sex act with your mom or with your dad? I mean, what's in your pants? A saber and a gun. Moving on. Whenever I see a news report about anything involving trans people, a little part of me dies every time I open that article's comment section. The amount of brain-dead hate being spouted there makes me lose hope for the future of Western civilization. Is there any place where trans people could exist in peace? Let's see. Countries with the highest number of sex changes. Okay, Thailand's number 1. Guess the stereotype is true. Second place. Excuse me, what the actual discombobulated fuck is Iran doing in second place? Yep, Iran, the same country where homosexuality carries the death penalty, is completely accepting of trans people. Apparently the government doesn't see it as going against Islamic law and even pays up to half of the costs of the operation. Turns out, they see it as a potential cure for homosexuality. These guys are so homophobic that it went full circle and became one of the most trans-accepting countries on earth. So yeah, if you think about transitioning and don't mind not only losing your penis, but also most of your human rights, Iran is the place to be apparently. And on that bizarre note, I want to end this video. Subscribe or else straight people are going to take all of your clothes and replace them with ugly t-shirts and cargo shorts.